The intake form asked for the animal's primary threat modality. I wrote none on record. The Khevari processing clerk read it twice, tapped the field with one of his secondary fingers, and looked at me the way a man looks at a form he suspects has been tampered with. "Staff Sergeant Tar," he said. "All companion animals present a threat modality. The assessment framework requires a minimum classification. You may select from the following tiers." He turned the terminal toward me. There were 9 tiers. Tier 1 was Passive Aesthetic Companion. Tier 9 was Active Apex Engagement Platform. I read them all the way down. None of them said what Rook was, which was a dog who went to work every day and did the work, and then went to sleep on a pad next to my bunk and snored quietly. "He's a working detection dog," I said, "attached to the 14th Handler Corps for 6 years. His primary function is olfactory sweep and handler security." "Handler security," the clerk said. "That would suggest a threat modality of at minimum." "He has never bitten anyone," I said. "On the record." The clerk looked at me. He looked at Rook, who was sitting at my left heel with his ears up, watching the clerk with the calm, unhurried attention of an animal that has assessed the room and found it unremarkable. Rook's tail was doing a slow half-wag, not a greeting wag, the quiet wag, the one that means he's comfortable and paying attention, and not particularly interested in anything enough to stop paying attention to it. The clerk wrote something on the form that was not none on record. I didn't ask what he wrote. The 14th Handler Corps had been told that participation in the Khevari Companion Animal Behavioral Assessment Initiative was, and I am quoting from the memo, voluntary in the same sense that any unit-wide activity recommended by a Joint Command Directive is voluntary. We had 48 hours to present our animals for intake processing, behavioral observation, and what the memo called a standardized threat index calibration. The results would be shared with the Khevari Behavioral Sciences Consortium. The results would inform a galaxy-wide taxonomy update for Earth-origin companion animals. The memo stressed that this was a scientific undertaking. I had asked my unit's senior handler, Master Sergeant Adeyemi, what she thought of it. She had looked at the memo for a long time. Then she had set it face down on her desk and said, "Take Rook. Don't volunteer information. Don't let them give him anything to eat or drink that didn't come out of your pack. Answer their direct questions accurately and keep everything else short." I asked her if she thought it was going to be a problem. She gave me the specific look she reserves for questions. She considers answerable only by someone with 20 or more years in the Corps. The look that says the question is not wrong, but the asker needs more runway. "No," she said, "not for Rook." She picked up the memo and turned it face up again, like she'd changed her mind about looking at it. It might be a problem for them. I had taken Rook. The evaluation facility was on the 4th sub-level of the consortium's research station, which was attached to the Khevari Academy at Station Threvith. It was a large, clean, very quiet building. The corridors were wider than necessary. The ceilings were high. Everything was built for beings considerably larger than I am, and, from the look of the door markings, for considerably more than one species. There were off-observation ports at irregular intervals in the corridor walls, round and rimmed in brushed gray composite, and most of them were dark, but I noticed that several of them had light behind them. I didn't look directly at the ports. Neither did Rook, which I noted. He knew they were there. I could tell by the slight angle of his ears. He had catalogued them and moved on. Rook has an organizational system for the world. Everything in an environment gets sorted into one of 3 categories: relevant and actionable, relevant and not yet actionable, or present and not relevant. The observation ports went into the 3rd category immediately. Whatever was behind them was present and not relevant. He logged them and went back to monitoring the corridor. He does this so quickly and so quietly that most people don't realize he's doing it at all. They see a dog with his ears up, walking calmly on a leash, occasionally glancing at things. What they're actually seeing is a continuous survey of every element of the environment, running at all times. at a depth I have spent 6 years beginning to understand. 6 years in, I am reasonably sure that I understand about half of what he knows about any room we walk into, and that he is politely aware of this and does not hold it against me. I got Rook when he was 14 months old. He had already washed out of 2 handler assignments, which is not unusual for a Malinois at that age and that particular quality of intensity. The core evaluation note said, high drive, excellent olfactory response, handler compatibility issues, reassign to extended development track. The handler who wrote that note had tried to work Rook the way you work a dog that is motivated by approval. Rook is not that kind of dog. He is motivated by the work, and by the specific person he has decided is worth doing the work with. And those are not the same thing. The extended development track meant he came to me at my 2nd station, and I was told that if the 3rd handler assignment didn't produce a viable working bond, he would be retired to a civilian placement. He was 14 months old. It took us about a week. I am not going to make it sound like a transformation scene, because it wasn't. It was a week of shifts, and I let Rook run his assessments of everything in his environment without trying to direct him. And I went where he wanted to go when it was safe to go there. And I kept my expectations reasonable and my affect level, and I fed him when he was hungry, and I let him sleep when he was done working, and I didn't push him further than the day's work required. And at some point toward the end of the 1st week, he started checking in, just glancing at me when he was assessing something new. Cross-referencing, not asking permission. He was never going to be that kind of dog. But noting my read on the situation and including it in his own calculation. And after that, we were working. We sat in a waiting area outside room 7 for about 20 minutes. There were 3 other handler teams ahead of us. The first was a consortium affiliate I didn't recognize. The species, I mean not the individual, though I didn't know the individual either. The handler was tall, narrow through the torso, and had the kind of coloration that suggests the species adapted in bright light environments. His animal was 6-limbed, the size of a large dog, covered in short dark fur, and it spent the entire weight trying to fit its head under his arm. The handler kept lifting his arm and letting it try. The animal would get its head most of the way in, realize it was not quite going to fit, withdraw, and then try again after a 30-second interval. I watched this cycle repeat 8 times. The handler seemed content to let it repeat indefinitely. The second was 2 Veth diplomatic attachés with a single animal on a woven lead. The attachés were very tall and very quiet. The animal was a large lizard, not quite the right word, but close enough in the absence of a better one, with independently mobile eyes and a slow, deliberate way of holding itself that communicated either deep patience or a fundamental indifference to the movement of time. It watched Rook for a while. Rook watched it back. They watched each other for perhaps 3 minutes, and then, apparently having reached some mutual understanding, both oriented away. Whatever they had established, it had not required more than 3 minutes and had not required any sound at all. The third team was another human, female corporal, 12th Corps, with a working bloodhound in a tracking harness. The bloodhound's name was Sergeant, according to the tag on the harness, which I appreciated on principle. The corporal's name was Vance, which I got from the standard tag on her upper left arm. We didn't talk for a few minutes. We were both in the same professional mode, which is the mode where you are in an unfamiliar facility among unfamiliar beings, and you are observing before you speak. Eventually, it became clear that we were both doing this, and that we were probably the only 2 people in the waiting area who were doing it. And Vance said, "First time?" "First assessment," I said. "You?" "15th," she said. I looked at her. "11th facility," she said. The consortium keeps scheduling new assessments at new facilities. Different examiners each time. Different equipment setup. She paused. They say it's because the model keeps producing anomalous results, and they're trying to determine whether the anomaly is environmental. I looked at Sergeant the Bloodhound, who was lying on his side on the floor next to Vance's boot, breathing in the slow way of an animal that has made peace with waiting. What does the model predict? I asked. I can only tell you what it predicts for bloodhounds, she said, because that's what I've sat through 11 times. The first tier is subapex flight response to primary stimulus. They bring in something large and see if Sergeant backs up or vocalizes. Tier 2 is dominant display when a subordinate handler approaches at close range. Tier 3 is resource guarding when food is presented to a third party. And Sergeant? 11 times, she said. 11 facilities. Not one of those 3 things has happened. Sergeant's ear twitched. He did not open his eyes. After the 11th time, I said, "What do? They write anomalous result in the documentation," she said. "Then they request a follow-up assessment." She looked at me. "I have been told the follow-up will be at yet another facility because environmental factors may be influencing the results." She paused. "The environment is everywhere I take Sergeant. The environment is me." I understood what she meant. I said, Yes, she said. The door to room 7 opened, and a Khevari technician stepped out and called for Handler Team Vance and Companion Unit Sergeant. Vance stood up. Sergeant stood up, stretched his entire body in one long, leisurely arc from nose to tail, the kind of full-body stretch that looks like a creature reclaiming its own skeleton, shook himself once and walked in at her heel. The door closed. Rook watched the door for a moment. Then he looked up at me. "I know," I said. His tail did the slow wag again. 19 minutes later, by my count, Vance came out. Sergeant came out with her. Sergeant's face had the expression of an animal who has been in a room and done his accounting of it and found it unremarkable. Vance's face had a different expression. It was the expression of someone who has watched a room do math in real time and arrive at the wrong answer for the 11th time. She didn't say anything to me. She gave me the look that Adeyemi gives me for unanswerable questions. And she walked Sergeant out of the waiting area. And Sergeant's nails made a businesslike clicking sound on the floor that faded away down the corridor. Then the technician called for Handler Team Tar and Companion Unit Rook. I want to describe the room, because the room was doing a lot of work. It was large, perhaps 15 meters across, and roughly circular, with a high curved ceiling and walls of some pale material that was either slightly warm or designed to appear that way. There were observation ports around the upper third of the walls, smaller than the corridor ports, and all of them were lit. The floor was the same pale composite as the corridor. There was a single chair near the center, facing the far wall, which held a large display terminal. To the left of the terminal, there was a long curved desk with 6 Khevari seated behind it. To the right of the terminal, there was nothing except floor. I noted the nothing except floor. The 6 Khevari behind the desk were all wearing the consortium's examination notation, pale green and gray, their species markings covered under the standard uniformity of observation protocol, which exists so that assessments can't be appealed on the grounds of examiner species bias. They had the look of people who had been in the same room for a long time and formed strong opinions about it. The one at the center of the desk was slightly larger than the others and held herself with the specific posture that indicates authority in Khevari. Social structure, weight slightly forward, secondary appendages folded in, eyes level and steady. Later, I found out her name was Senior Examiner Threveth Sovin. At the time, she was just the center one, and I didn't have her name yet. A 7th Khevari was standing near the side wall, separate from the desk group, wearing a different notation, darker, with a handler's equipment harness across the thorax. I looked at the handler's harness. I looked at the empty space on the right side of the room. I filed both of those observations. Staff Sergeant Tar, Sovin said, "Thank you for your participation in the initiative. Happy to contribute to the scientific record," I said. This was not entirely accurate, but it was what Adeyemi would have said, and it was the appropriate thing to say. Rook is certified under the Joint Core Handler Compact, Annex 7, Working Detection Specialty. His documentation is in the intake packet. "We have the documentation," Sovin said. "Before we begin, I want to explain the assessment structure so that the results can be interpreted in proper context. We are running a 3-tier behavioral stimulus response observation. The purpose is to calibrate our predictive model against actual animal behavior so that we can provide accurate threat indexing for Earth origin companion animals across consortium member space. This is a peaceful scientific exercise. Nothing in this room is designed to harm your animal. Understood, I said. You may sit in the chair. I sat in the chair. Rook sat at my left heel. I had not told him to sit. He sat because we were in a room with a lot of people in it. And sitting at my heel was his default configuration for that situation. He was facing the desk. His ears were forward. His tail was still. Sovin looked at Rook for a moment. I had grown accustomed to the moment when people who have read about Rook look at Rook for the first time. There is always a pause. The documentation says Belgian Malinois, 32 kilograms, 6 years active deployment. The documentation is accurate, but Rook sitting in a room with his ears up and his eyes level has a quality that the documentation does not capture, which is that he looks exactly like himself and nothing else. He doesn't look dangerous. He doesn't look harmless. He looks like a dog who is paying close attention and has no particular feeling about the fact that you are also paying close attention. Sovin looked at her terminal. Companion Unit Rook, Belgian Malinois, Earth origin domestic working subspecies, mass approximately 32 kilograms, 6 years of age, 6 years active deployment. Handler bond duration, 6 years. She looked up. Companion Unit Rook has never been assessed. This is his first assessment, I confirmed. Our model generates a behavioral prediction for each companion unit before observation begins based on species parameters, mass, age, bond duration, and deployment history. For companion unit Rook, the model predicts the following. She touched her terminal. The large display behind her lit up with a structured list. In response to Tier 1 primary stimulus, a direct approach by an unfamiliar entity of equivalent or greater mass, companion unit Rook will display subapex flight response, characterized by backward displacement, vocalization, and handler-seeking behavior. I looked at the list. I looked at Rook. Rook was watching a point about a meter to the left of Sovin's head. Not her, the point. Something had caught his attention there. His ears were slightly angled. He was, as best I could tell, watching a ventilation grill. In response to Tier 2 stimulus, Sovin continued, presentation of a subordinate ranked Khevari handler at close approach. The model predicts dominant display behavior, characterized by postural elevation, vocalization at elevated register, and boundary assertion. I looked at Rook. Rook looked at the ventilation grill. In response to Tier 3 stimulus, presentation of the companion unit's primary food resource to a third party, the model predicts resource guarding behavior, characterized by physical interposition, vocalization, and escalating alert posture. I looked at Rook. Rook had stopped looking at the ventilation grill. He was now looking at me. He looked at me with the expression he uses when he is waiting for something to happen, and it has not happened yet, and he is still comfortable, but the comfortable is beginning to have a mild, businesslike edge to it. I knew that look. It meant he was ready to work. We will begin Tier 1, Sovin said. The side door opened. I had expected another Khevari. What came through the side door was a Neth. I don't know if you've encountered the Neth, but the short version is this. They are about 2.5 meters at the shoulder, covered in coarse layered integument that runs from dark copper at the spine to pale silver at the underside. They have a forward position sensory cluster that gives them an expression that reads, in my experience, as intense close interest in whatever they're looking at. And they move the way heavy things move when they are making a considered effort to move, quietly, which is to say that they don't succeed at quiet, but they succeed at suggesting they could if required. The one that came through the side door was large even for a Neth. The core documentation on the species puts their standard mass at roughly 400 kilograms. This one looked like it was on the high end of that range, and it moved into the room with the particular confidence of a being that has not recently been required to adjust its opinion of itself. It walked to a position about 4 meters from where Rook was sitting and stopped. Then it oriented its sensory cluster toward Rook and held still. I watched Rook. Rook had registered the Neth the moment the door opened. I could tell by the ears. They had angled toward the door, tracked the Neth's movement across the room, and stayed on it. He had turned his head approximately 15 degrees. He was doing the assessment. I could read it in the ears and the nose and the way his weight was distributed, unchanged on his haunches. Then his ears relaxed back to their standard alert, not alarm configuration. Then he looked at the ventilation grill again. The Neth took a step closer. Then another. It was now perhaps 2 meters away. It was, objectively speaking, very large. It smelled of whatever the consortium used for cleaning composite floors and something underneath that. Something older and drier. Something I couldn't categorize. Something Rook's nose was clearly more interested in than I was. I watched his nose. It was doing the slow, even, unhurried work it does when there is nothing chemically urgent in the environment. The interested nose, not the alarmed nose. The nose that says, there is something here worth knowing about, and I am learning about it, and this is fine. The Neth made a sound, low and resonant, from somewhere in its forward sensory cluster. The 6 Khevari behind the desk were all watching Rook very carefully. Rook yawned. He yawned the way he yawns when we have been sitting in one position for too long, and his body is making a technical adjustment. The full yawn, jaw wide, tongue curling, the brief shake of the head, the one small sound that accompanies it, a comprehensive yawn. Then he settled. His chin dropped approximately 5 degrees toward his sternum. He was still watching the Neth with the ears, tracking, always tracking, but the rest of him had filed the Neth appropriately and moved on. Sovin made a note. The Neth stood there for another 30 seconds. Then it retreated to the side door and went out. There was a pause in the room. One of the Khevari at the desk said something in a subdialect I don't speak. Sovin replied briefly. I caught the register, if not the content. It was the register of a person who has received information that differs from the expected information and is deciding whether to classify the difference as significant. She touched her terminal. Tier 1 observation complete, she said. The model predicted subapex flight response. Companion Unit Rook displayed no displacement, no vocalization, no handler-seeking behavior. She paused. We are proceeding to Tier 2. The 7th Khevari, the one with the handler's harness, walked out from the side wall. He was smaller than the others, younger-looking by Khevari standards. His harness had the markings of a junior classification. He approached from the right side, moving slowly, which was appropriate. He stopped about 1.5 meters from Rook's right flank, which made him the closest any Khevari in the room had gotten to Rook so far. He was standing slightly below Rook's eyeline, his head at approximately the height of Rook's shoulder, and he had his secondary appendages folded, in the Khevari gesture that communicates approximate non-aggression. Rook looked at him. It was a long look, 8 or 9 seconds. The level, patient look that Rook uses when he is forming an opinion. He has an opinion-forming process that is observably distinct from his threat assessment process. The threat assessment process is fast and conclusory. He reaches a result quickly and acts on it or files it. The opinion-forming process is slower and more deliberate. It involves looking at the specific being in front of him, taking in information I can't fully read from the outside, and arriving at a classification that is not about threat but about something else. Warmth, I've always thought, though that's my word and not his. Then Rook stood up, walked 1 step to the right, and leaned his right shoulder against the junior handler's lower leg. There was a silence in the room. The junior handler looked down at Rook. He looked at his own leg. He looked at Rook again. He did not move. Rook stood there for approximately 4 seconds, leaning gently against the junior handler's leg. His tail was doing the greeting wag, not the quiet wag. The slow, low, friendly wag that he does when he has assessed someone and decided he has some mild warmth for them. It means something coming from Rook. He has warmth for maybe 30 beings in the known galaxy. I am on that list. Adeyemi is on that list. A cook at the 14th mess hall named Brisavec is on that list. Because Brisavec once spent 15 minutes talking to Rook and scratching his ears, while I was filling out a late requisition, and Rook decided that made Brisavec worth knowing. The number stays low because he doesn't hand it out. He considers it and then decides. He had apparently considered the junior handler and decided he was worth a lean. Then he walked back to my heel and sat down. The junior handler looked at his leg. He looked at Sovin. He said something I didn't catch. Tier 2 observation complete, Sovin said. She touched her terminal. The model predicted dominant display behavior. Companion unit Rook displayed postural movement toward the stimulus, physical contact at low intensity, and voluntary withdrawal. No vocalization. No boundary assertion. She paused. This pause was slightly longer than the previous one. We are proceeding to Tier 3. A different technician came through the side door carrying a metal bowl. The bowl contained Rook's food, or something chemically proximate to it. I couldn't confirm the brand from where I was sitting, but Rook's nose angled toward it immediately, which told me it was either his standard ration or a very good approximation. The technician set the bowl down on the floor approximately 3 meters away, positioning it clearly outside Rook's immediate reach, and then walked to the far side of the bowl, crouched down, and made a show of eating from it. This was, I noted, a committed performance. The technician ate from the bowl with apparent thoroughness. I appreciated the professionalism. Whatever the consortium paid its assessment technicians, they earned it. Rook looked at the bowl. He looked at it with the particular attention he gives things that are relevant to him. His nose was working. His ears were slightly forward. He was clearly aware of the bowl, clearly aware of the food, clearly aware of the technician crouched over it, eating Rook's food in front of Rook. Then he lay down. He lowered himself to the floor in the way he does when he's settling in for the duration. Front legs forward, chin heading toward the floor, weight distributed evenly. He did not take his eyes off the bowl immediately. He watched it for another few seconds. He watched the technician eating from it. His nose continued working. And then he looked at me, a long, level look, the look that says he has registered the situation and is checking it against my read of the situation. And then he put his chin on my boot. He put his chin on my boot and closed his eyes. The technician kept eating from the bowl, looked up at Sovin, and then stopped. Sovin said nothing for a long time. Tier 3 observation complete, she finally said. The model predicted resource guarding behavior. Companion unit Rook displayed no interposition, no vocalization, no alert posture. Another pause. Companion unit Rook is lying on the floor with his head on the handler's foot. There was a murmured exchange among the 6 at the desk. I could not make out the words, but I could make out the register of people who have received information that does not fit into the space they had allocated for it, and are now deciding whether to make more space or to look for a different interpretation of the information. On the large display behind Sovin, the structured prediction list was still visible. Next to each tier, where the predicted behaviors had been listed in expectation of being confirmed, there was now a notation in Khevari script that I read as roughly equivalent to data inconsistent with model parameters. All 3 tiers, all 3 lines. Staff Sergeant Tar, Sovin said. I want to be clear that the data we are collecting is of significant scientific value even when, perhaps especially when, observed behavior diverges from prediction. Understood, I said. The divergence in all 3 tiers is notable, she said. Our model has a validation rate of approximately 93% across assessed companion species. Across Earth origin domestic working animals specifically, the validation rate in previous assessments has been. She looked at her terminal. 31%, I said. Yes, she said. She looked at Rook, who had his chin on my boot and was breathing in the slow rhythm of an animal that is comfortable, but not asleep. We have assessed 14 Earth origin companion animals in this facility over the past 3 months. No behavioral tier has been confirmed in any assessment. I thought about Corporal Vance in the waiting area, telling me it was her 11th facility in 11 assessments, and Sergeant the Bloodhound lying on his side snoring. The model is built on a cross-species framework, I said. It wasn't a question. Correct, Sovin said. The framework incorporates behavioral data from over 400 companion animal species across 47 member systems. Earth animals weren't in the 400. Earth was not yet a member system when the framework was developed, Sovin said. Earth origin companion animals have been added to the assessed population as membership has expanded. How long has the framework been running? 212 standard years, she said. I thought about that. 212 years of building a model on what frightened animals do. The model is predicting what animals do when they're afraid, I said. Sovin looked at me. The flight response, the dominant display, the resource guarding. Those are threat response behaviors. The model is predicting what an animal does when it doesn't know the room is safe. I looked at Rook. He was still breathing slow. Rook knows the room is safe. How does he know the room is safe? Sovin said. Because I'm in it, I said, and I'm relaxed. And I told him we were going somewhere new and to check it out and stay with me. And he checked it out and it wasn't anything. So he stayed with me. The Neth was large. He registered it, but I didn't react to it, so the threat evaluation closed. The junior handler was new, but Rook has about 30 seconds of data on any new person before he forms an opinion, and his opinion on the junior handler was that he seemed all right. The food, he knows the food is his. He knows I know the food is his. He knows I'm not alarmed about where the food is, so there's nothing to guard. There was a long pause at the desk. Sovin said carefully, "The model does not incorporate a handler trust modifier." "I know," I said. "The framework has no mechanism for an animal that defers its threat assessment to the handler," she said. She said it the way you say something you are understanding for the first time while you are saying it, working out the shape of the thing as the words form. "It's not deference," I said. "It's not that he can't assess. He's assessed everything in this room. He did it in the first 60 seconds. He just checked his assessment against mine and decided there wasn't anything to escalate." I paused. "He's been doing that for 6 years. I've been doing it for 6 years. We're very good at it." Sovin made a note. Several of the other examiners were making notes. The junior handler, who had returned to his position near the side wall, was also making a note, and he was looking at Rook while he did it. "Staff Sergeant Tar," Sovin said, "I want to ask you something that is outside the standard protocol. You may decline to answer. Go ahead. How many environments has Companion Unit Rook assessed?" I thought about it. 6 years of active deployment. Rotations through 4 stations, 3 ships, joint exercises with 2 different allied corps, diplomatic escort assignments, 6 of them, transit hubs, corridors and holding bays and mess halls and courtrooms and kennel facilities, and the office where I filed my late requisition while Brysovek scratched Rook's ears and talked to him like he understood every word, which he may have. "Several hundred," I said. "Maybe more." We stopped counting at around 150. "And in those environments, how many times has he identified an actual threat?" "Twice," I said. The room was very quiet. "Both times were olfactory detections," I said. "Explosive compounds. Once in a transit container, once in a service corridor. Both times, correct identification. Both times he sat down next to it and looked at me and waited." "He sat down," Sovin said. "Sitting is his alert behavior," I said. "He sits and looks at me. That's what he does when he's found something. He doesn't bark. He doesn't paw at it. He doesn't escalate. He sits down and looks at me until I come look, and then I take it from there." There was a pause. "Your documentation noted," Sovin said carefully, "that Companion Unit Rook has never bitten anyone, on the record." "Correct," I said. "And off the record?" I looked at her. "We are not recording this portion of the conversation," she said. "The terminal is paused." I looked at the terminal. The recording indicator was amber. "Stand by." I had not seen her pause it. She must have done it while I was watching Rook. "Once," I said, 18 months ago, detention facility on Station Kovith. An individual made a physical approach to my person that I had already verbally indicated was not authorized. I had told him to stop. He didn't stop. What was the outcome for the individual? He stopped, I said. Soven looked at me. She looked at Rook. Rook had opened one eye. The eye was aimed at Soven. Then it closed. He received medical attention, I said. He made a full recovery. He did not file a complaint. The record shows no incident at Station Kovith, Soven said. No, I said. The room was quiet. Rook breathed. Staff Sergeant Tar, Soven said. I want to run a Tier 4 observation. I looked at her. Tier 4 is unscheduled, she said. It is not part of the standard protocol. I am required to obtain consent before proceeding. It is used in exceptional circumstances when the standard assessment has produced results, suggesting the model requires additional data. She paused. In the 212 years this framework has been operational, Tier 4 has been administered 6 times. I thought about Adeyemi's face when she read the memo. I thought about Corporal Vance outside the door, not saying anything, just giving me the look. What does Tier 4 involve? I said. We introduce a second animal, Soven said. A species-matched Apex-class working animal from our own handler program. The model predicts a dominance event when 2 working animals of comparable capability encounter each other in a closed space. She paused. The Khevari working animal is called a Veth Hound. It is a species we have partnered with for approximately 80 years. It is classified as Apex Companion Class 1 under our current taxonomy. I looked at the handler standing near the side wall, the one with the equipment harness. That's your hound, handler, I said. Correct. The hound is outside the door. Correct. I looked at Rook. He was still lying on the floor with his chin on my boot, breathing in his slow rhythm. He knew I was looking at him. His ear angled slightly toward me. I had learned, over 6 years, to read that ear angle as his version of acknowledging that I was paying attention to him, which was not the same as him paying attention to me. He was always paying attention to me, but was his way of noting that the attention was mutual. Rook, I said quietly. He opened both eyes. We're going to have company, I said. It's fine. He looked at me. He did the ear angle that meant he had noted the information and was filing it appropriately. Consent is given, I told Soven. She nodded at the handler near the wall. The handler went to the side door and opened it. I want to be careful about how I describe what happened next, because the temptation is to make it dramatic, and it was not dramatic. It was, in fact, almost entirely still. The Veth Hound came through the door. The Veth Hound was large. I had access to the Corps' reference documentation on Khevari working animals. But documentation is documentation, and standing in the same room as the animal in question is a different proposition. It was roughly the size and shape of a large feline with significant structural differences. Longer, lower at the withers, with limbs that suggested it was built for either very fast linear movement or sustained low-speed tracking, depending on the task. Its integument was dark, close-lying, with a slight iridescence at the angle of the ceiling light. Its sensory cluster, the Veth Hound's equivalent of a face, was oriented forward and slightly down. It moved into the room the way something moves when it is accustomed to being the most capable animal present and has not recently been given cause to revise that opinion. The Veth Hound stopped. It had stopped approximately 4 meters from Rook, the same distance the Neth had used, I noted, which may have been a coincidence, or may have been something in the room's protocol guidelines. The Veth Hound looked at Rook. Rook looked at the Veth Hound. Rook was still lying down. His chin was still on my boot. He had raised his head slightly, not lifted it, just raised it enough to have direct line of sight. And he was looking at the Veth Hound with the same level, unhurried attention he had given the ventilation grill and the Neth and the junior handler. The assessment look, the look that says, I see you, I am gathering information. I have not yet reached a conclusion that would change my current posture. The Veth Hound held very still. Rook looked at the Veth Hound for what I measured afterward at approximately 11 seconds. 11 seconds of direct, level, unhurried attention. The Veth Hound did not move during those 11 seconds. It did not make a sound. Its sensory cluster was absolutely fixed on Rook. I could see, from where I was sitting, that something about the Veth Hound's posture had changed from when it entered the room. Something in the weight, distribution, the angle of the sensory cluster. Something that I did not have enough knowledge of the species to name precisely, but which read, through the general cross-species language of how bodies hold themselves, as a recalibration. Then Rook looked at me. He looked at me the way he looks at me when we have been somewhere, and he has checked it out and found it unremarkable and is waiting to know what we are doing here. The look that says, assessed, categorized, no action required, what's next? Then he put his chin back on my boot. The Veth Hound did not move for a long time. Eventually it took one step backward, then another. It oriented toward its handler slowly, carefully, and walked back to the side wall. The handler stood very still. The Veth Hound stood next to the handler and looked at the floor about a meter in front of its forefeet. I looked at the 6 Khevari at the desk. They were not making notes, they were watching. Soven was watching Rook. Rook's eyes had closed. The junior handler was watching Rook. The other 4 examiners were watching each other, briefly, and then watching Rook. I did not say anything. I had been in enough rooms with Rook to know that sometimes the most useful thing is to stay quiet and let the room finish, understanding what it just saw, at whatever pace the room needs. Soven turned back to her terminal. She touched it. She looked at the display. She looked at it for a long time, long enough that the room stayed quiet, and the only sounds were the ventilation system and Rook's breathing. I watched her read whatever the model had predicted for Tier 4. I watched her read it, and I watched her face do the specific, controlled work that faces do when the document they are reading has become a document they no longer know how to use. She touched the terminal again. Tier 4 observation complete, she said. Her voice was exactly level. 6 years of handler work has taught me to read the voice that is being kept exactly level, because it does not know what the face would do if the voice relaxed. The model predicted a dominance event, she said, characterized by vocalization, postural competition, physical escalation, and resolution by displacement of the lower-ranked animal. She paused. Companion Unit Rook displayed no vocalization, no postural change, no escalation. A pause. Companion Unit Rook is lying on the floor with his head on the handler's boot. Another pause. Apex Companion Class 1. Veth Hound Unit Designation 7 is standing against the wall. Nobody in the room said anything for a while. I looked at Rook, who was breathing slow, his ribs rising and falling in that comfortable rhythm. One ear was angled slightly toward the Veth Hound's position near the wall. Still tracking, as always, because that's what he does. He never fully stops. But the rest of him was at rest in the way that means he has concluded his business and is satisfied with the conclusion. I thought about what the room looked like right now and what it would have looked like an hour ago to someone who had not been in it. An hour ago, the prediction was clean. Companion animal enters, stimulus is presented, stimulus response table is consulted, data is recorded, framework is validated, 212 years of framework, 93% validation rate. A well-made instrument, calibrated against 400 species across 47 systems. The instrument was designed to answer one question. What does a frightened animal do? The instrument did not have a mechanism for an animal that was not frightened. That was not an engineering flaw. Exactly. It had never needed one. In 400 species and 47 systems, apparently, you could always produce a frightened animal if you brought a large enough stimulus into the room. The framework's authors had, I suspected, never met a Belgian Malinois who had spent 6 years learning that every new room could be assessed, understood, filed, and moved on from, and that the way to know a room was dangerous was to watch the person you trusted and see whether they thought it was dangerous. They had never met an animal for whom the stimulus, the neth, the subordinate handler, the food bowl, the Veth Hound, was simply one more thing in an environment full of things, all of which had been assessed and categorized and determined not to require a response. Staff Sergeant Tar, Sovin said after a long pause. What is your companion unit's threat index in your professional assessment? I thought about it. Rook's threat index, I said, is whatever the room requires it to be. She looked at me. When the room requires nothing, I said, his threat index is 0. He's relaxed. He's comfortable. He knows where I am. He's probably thinking about that ventilation grill and whether it smells like anything interesting. I paused. When the room requires something, you have the station Kovith information. Sovin was quiet. He doesn't advertise, I said. That's the part the model can't measure. He doesn't display. He doesn't signal. There's no threat posture, no vocalization, no elevated alert. He just handles it, and then the question is closed, and he goes back to being a dog lying on the floor next to a person he trusts. I looked at Rook. The model is looking for the display. The display isn't there because he doesn't need it. If he needed it, it would be there. But he doesn't need it. The room is safe. I paused. The room is safe because he and I have spent 6 years making rooms safe, I said. We're very good at it. Sovin looked at Rook for a long moment. Then she made a note. The assessment took another 40 minutes after that, and none of it was additional testing. It was documentation. Sovin asked me questions, and I answered them with as much accuracy as I could, and the junior handler asked me questions too, and his were good ones, careful, specific, genuinely curious in the way that is distinct from procedurally curious. How does handler trust modification develop over time? What is the developmental timeline for a Malinois to establish reliable secondary threat deferral, and is there a critical period for it? What indicators distinguish active environmental assessment from resting state from the handler's perspective? What does the handler experience when the animal has identified a threat that the handler has not yet identified? That last one I thought about for a while before answering. He changes first, I said, not dramatically. His ears angle toward the thing. His nose does a specific kind of work, faster, more focused. And he does something with his weight, distributes it differently, though I can only tell you that from 6 years of watching, because I couldn't describe it to you technically. I paused. I know before I know, if that makes sense. I read it from him before I've processed what I'm reading, and then he sits down, and then I know. The junior handler wrote that down carefully. He asked me a few more questions. He asked whether Rook's behavior in a new environment ever looked like anxiety, and what the difference was between anxiety presentation and assessment presentation from the outside. I told him they look similar to an observer who doesn't know the animal, but in my experience the key difference is duration. An anxious animal escalates or resolves within a predictable window, while Rook doing an assessment is simply steady. The same level of attention at minute 1 as at minute 15, with no escalation and no resolution because there's nothing to resolve. He was interested in that. He wrote it down slowly, like he was choosing the words he was writing, as carefully as I'd chosen the words I'd spoken. He asked whether the bond was communicative, whether I understood what Rook was communicating to me in any structured sense, or whether it was something more like reading weather. I thought about that one for longer. Both, I said. There are things he does that I understand clearly, in the way you understand a signal. The sit for an olfactory alert, the ear angle for tracking, the weight shift when he's identified something he's not sure about yet. Those are readable. I paused. And then there's the rest of it. The way the room feels different when he's relaxed versus when he's working. The way I know what he's paying attention to without looking at him. That part I can't describe to you structurally. It's 6 years of shared time. I don't know what to call it except what it is. Sovin, who had been making notes during this, looked up. What is it? He knows me and I know him, I said. And in a room we're not sure about. That's worth more than any tear. Rook, for his part, spent the documentation time making a slow tour of the room, not all at once, in increments, the way he does when he is comfortable and curious, and there is no particular pressure on his time. He got up from my boot at some point in the first 10 minutes and walked to the side wall and smelled along the base of it. He came back and walked to the desk and smelled along the desk's base panels. The 6 Khevari at the desk watched him do this. He smelled one of them, the one at the far left end, for slightly longer than the others, and she held very still during this. And when he moved on, she made a notation that I suspected was not about the assessment framework. He went to the side door and smelled the threshold carefully. He went to the ventilation grill he had been watching since we sat down and smelled it, and his tail did a single hard wag, the interested wag, the one that means whatever is in the ductwork is worth knowing about. He filed it. He came back and sat next to the junior handler for a moment, which the junior handler received by being very quiet and very still. And then Rook moved on and came back to my heel and sat down. The junior handler had not written anything during that sequence. He had been watching Rook. When we were done, Sovin handed me the standard completion documentation. On the form, in the field where the threat index was supposed to be recorded, she had written a notation in both Khevari script and standard. In standard, it said, "Threat index classification pending framework revision. Current model insufficient for species parameters." Under that, in a different hand, smaller, careful, written in the notation style I had come to associate with the junior handler, it said, "No threat observed. No threat required." I looked at that for a moment. Then I put the documentation in my pack. "Staff Sergeant Tar," Sovin said as I was standing to leave. "May I ask? Companion Unit Rook? His name, what is the origin?" "Chess piece," I said. "The Corps has a tradition with working K9 designations. The ones the handlers think are going to be reliable. You name them after chess pieces. The pieces that can go anywhere on the board." Sovin considered this. "All directions," she said. "All directions," I said. "Long game, patient, goes where it needs to go." She looked at Rook. Rook looked back at her. It was the level, unhurried look. The one that means, "I see you. I have formed an opinion about you." The opinion is not alarming on either side. "Goodbye, Companion Unit Rook," she said. Rook's tail did the slow wag once. The warm one. The one that means he has assessed something and decided it is worth a small, measured warmth. He does not give it often, and when he gives it, he means it. We walked out. In the corridor, I passed the observation ports, the ones that had been lit throughout the assessment. Several of them were still lit. There were silhouettes behind the glass. Additional observers. Whoever the consortium had watching from the secondary positions. I didn't count them. More than a few. I had known they were there since we walked in. Rook had known before I did. He hadn't done anything about it because there was nothing to do. That's the thing about Rook. That's the thing that 212 years of framework had not found a tier for. And that 31 confirmation attempts across 14 Earth animals in this facility alone had not produced. And that Corporal Vance had been trying to explain through 11 facilities and had not yet found words for. And that I have spent 6 years trying to understand and have arrived at only approximately. He understands the difference between a threat and a presence. He understands that most of what fills a room is just the world doing its usual business, and that the world's usual business does not require a response. He saves the response for when the response is needed. In 6 years and several hundred assessed environments, he has needed it twice. I put my hand on the top of his head as we walked briefly, the way I do when we're between things and there's a moment for it. He leaned into it the way he does. The ramp down to the transit level was long and slightly curved, and other Corps handlers were coming up as we went down, leading their animals toward the evaluation suites. I recognized a few handlers by patch. I didn't know their animals. There was a male corporal from what looked like the 9th, with a working German shepherd in a vest. The shepherd looked at Rook as they passed, and Rook looked back. A clean, level exchange, both of them doing the assessment at identical speed, and then both oriented forward again. There was an older handler I didn't recognize by Corps, who had a dog I couldn't identify by breed, some kind of mixed terrier configuration, small and compact and bright-eyed, and the terrier did a more involved survey of Rook, head tilting, taking its time, and Rook gave it the same level attention he gave everything, and then moved on. There was a consortium handler, not human, Veth, I thought, with an animal on a very long lead, and that animal looked at Rook from a distance and chose not to look at Rook from a closer distance, and that was fine. Rook looked back at each of them in turn. Brief, level, the assessment look, not unfriendly, not anything, just, I see you. I have noted you. I have nothing to escalate. Carry on. Adeyemi was waiting at the bottom of the ramp with a coffee from the station commissary. She had either been there the entire time or had very good information about how long the assessment was going to take. Probably both. She handed me the coffee and looked at Rook. Rook walked to her and sat down at her left heel, which is where he sits when the work portion of the day is concluded. And he is now in the company of people he has decided to like. He looked up at her with the level, comfortable attention he gives people who are on the list. How'd he do? Adeyemi said. I thought about Tier 1, the Neth, the Yawn. I thought about Tier 2, the Junior Handler, the lean that lasted 4 seconds and meant something. I thought about Tier 3, and the food bowl, and Rook putting his chin on my boot and going to sleep. I thought about Tier 4 and 11 seconds of level attention, and Apex Companion Class 1 standing against the wall while the examiner's not making notes in the quiet room. I thought about the Junior Handler's notation in small, careful letters. No threat observed. No threat required. He was Rook, I said. Adeyemi looked at me. Then she looked at Rook. Then she made the sound she makes when something has gone exactly the way she expected it to go, and she is satisfied with the universe on that particular point. The sound is small and brief and means more than it sounds like. Yeah, she said. He would be. Rook's tail did the slow wag. We drank our coffee and walked to the transit dock, and Rook's nails made their businesslike clicking sound on the corridor floor. And the station moved around us the way stations move, full of its own business, and we were 3 people who had been somewhere and were now going somewhere else. And there was nothing to escalate, and the question, as far as Rook was concerned, was closed.